Have you ever watched a horse's ears swivel toward one person in a crowded barn? Or noticed how a 1,000-pound animal will stand completely still for someone they trust, but dance nervously away from everyone else? There's something profound happening in these moments. Something that goes far deeper than simple training or food rewards. For the past 15 years, researchers in equine cognition have been uncovering what horse people have suspected for centuries. Horses don't just tolerate humans or respond to conditioning. They form genuine preferences, they choose favorites, and the science behind how they make these choices is absolutely fascinating. Let me start with a study that changed everything we thought we knew about horse intelligence. In 2016, researchers at the University of Sussex conducted an experiment that made headlines around the world. They showed horses photographs of human faces displaying different emotions, happy faces and angry faces. The horses looked at these images, then the actual humans from the photos walked into the arena. Here's what happened. The horses remembered. Days later, when they encountered the person whose angry face they'd seen in the photograph, their heart rates increased. They viewed that person from their left eye, the eye connected to the right hemisphere of the brain, which processes threatening stimuli in horses. But it gets more interesting. When they encountered the person whose happy face they'd seen, they approached more readily. No elevated heart rate, no stress signals. The horses were reading and remembering human emotional states from facial expressions alone, and they were using that information to make decisions about who to trust. Think about what this means. Your horse isn't just responding to whether you brought carrots or how you handle the lead rope. They're reading your face. They're cataloging your emotional state. They're building a mental file on you that includes not just what you do, but who you are emotionally. Dr. Karen McComb, who led that Sussex study, said something that stuck with me. Horses have a much richer social cognition than we've previously understood. They're not just reacting. They're evaluating. Evaluating. That's the key word. Now, before we dive into exactly what horses are evaluating and how they make their choices, we need to understand something fundamental about how horses perceive the world, because horses don't think like dogs. They don't bond like cats. They have their own unique social architecture, shaped by 50 million years of evolution as prey animals living in complex herd structures. Let's start with their senses. A horse's visual field is nearly 360 degrees. They have the largest eyes of any land mammal. They can see almost everything around them simultaneously, except for a small blind spot directly in front of their nose and directly behind their hindquarters. But here's what's crucial. Horses have two distinct modes of vision. Monocular vision, where each eye operates independently, scanning for threats. And binocular vision, where both eyes focus forward on a single object, creating depth perception and detailed analysis. When a horse looks at you with both eyes, when they square up and face you directly, they're making a choice to see you in detail rather than scan for danger. That binocular gaze is significant. It means they've decided you're worth their focused attention. A 2018 study from the University of Pisa measured this. Researchers found that horses spent significantly more time in binocular gaze with handlers they'd bonded with versus unfamiliar handlers. The difference was measurable down to the second. Preferred humans received longer, more frequent binocular attention. Your horse is literally choosing to see you more clearly. But vision is just one piece. Let's talk about something that surprised even experienced researchers. Horses have extraordinary memory. For individual humans. A study published in 2020 by French researchers tested horses who hadn't seen specific handlers in 8 months. 8 months is a long time in equine care. Handlers change, horses get sold, training programs shift. But when these horses encountered handlers they'd had positive experiences with 8 months earlier, their behavior changed immediately. They approached more quickly. Their heart rate variability indicated relaxation rather than stress. Some horses nickered a greeting vocalization before the handler even entered visual range, suggesting they recognized the sound of familiar footsteps or voice. The control group horses meeting handlers for the first time showed none of these responses. 8 months. That's not instinct. That's not conditioning. That's memory. Detailed, individual-specific memory. Dr. Leah Lansade, who conducted this research, concluded that horses form long-term mental representations of individual humans based on the emotional quality of past interactions. Good experiences create lasting positive associations. Stressful experiences create lasting wariness. Your horse is building a history with you. Every interaction is a data point. Every session adds to their understanding of who you are and whether you're someone they want to be close to. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because horses aren't just passive recipients of human behavior, they're active participants in the relationship. They're making sophisticated social decisions based on what researchers call social referencing. Social referencing is when an animal looks to another individual to determine how to respond to an uncertain situation. Human infants do this constantly. They look to their parents' faces to decide if something new is safe or scary. Horses do this too, but they do it with a level of nuance that stunned researchers. In a groundbreaking 2021 study from Italy, researchers created an ambiguous situation, a novel object that could be either interesting or threatening. They had handlers react to this object in different ways. Some showed curiosity and approached it confidently. Others showed nervousness and avoided it. The horses watched their handlers' reactions. Then researchers measured how the horses responded to the object when alone. Horses who'd seen their handler react confidently were significantly more likely to investigate the object themselves. Horses who'd seen their handler react nervously stayed back, even when that handler wasn't present anymore. But here's the stunning part. This only worked with handlers the horses had bonded with. When unfamiliar humans showed the exact same reactions, the horses ignored those emotional cues and made their own assessments. Your horse is selectively trusting your judgment about the world, but only if you've earned that trust. Think about what this means for the favorite human question. A horse's favorite isn't just someone who's nice to them or feeds them treats. It's someone whose emotional guidance they trust enough to override their own prey animal caution. That's profound. That's partnership. Let me give you a concrete example from a 2019 observational study at a therapeutic riding center in Colorado. Researchers tracked 10 horses working with multiple handlers and riders over 6 months. They measured subtle behavioral indicators, ear position, head height, lip tension, eye softness, voluntary approach, and what they called checking in behavior, moments when the horse looked toward the handler without being cued. Every single horse showed clear preferences, and those preferences were consistent across months of observation. One horse, a mare named Willow, worked with 7 different handlers during the study period. With 5 of them, she was compliant but distant, professional but not engaged. She did what was asked, but her ears swiveled constantly, monitoring the environment. Her head stayed elevated. She checked in maybe once or twice per session. With 2 specific handlers, everything changed. Her head lowered, her ears stayed soft and oriented toward the handler more than 50% of the time. She checked in an average of 14 times per session, often approaching these handlers even when they were working with other horses. What made the difference? The researchers tracked everything: tone of voice, feed timing, grooming duration, training methods. The answer wasn't what they expected. The 2 preferred handlers weren't more skilled riders. They weren't more experienced horse people. They didn't give more treats or spend more grooming time. What they did differently was emotional consistency and genuine relaxation. When researchers measured the handler's heart rate variability, an indicator of nervous system state, the 2 preferred handlers showed consistently higher variability, indicating parasympathetic activation. They were genuinely calm, not performing calmness. The other handlers showed stress markers even when they appeared outwardly confident, and somehow Willow knew the difference. Horses are reading our nervous systems. They're detecting authenticity versus performance, and they're making preferences based on who genuinely feels safe to be around. This brings us to something that fascinates me about equine cognition. Horses appear to have what researchers call theory of mind capabilities. This is the ability to recognize that other beings have mental states, thoughts, feelings, intentions that differ from your own. Theory of mind is rare in the animal kingdom. It requires sophisticated social intelligence. We've documented it clearly in great apes, dolphins, elephants, and corvids. The evidence for horses has been building steadily over the past decade. A 2016 study from Japan tested whether horses could understand human attention states. Could they tell the difference between a human who was watching them versus a human who was distracted or looking away? The researchers set up a situation where horses could either approach a human who was facing them or a human who had their back turned. Both humans held food. The horses consistently chose the human who was facing them, even when the food was equally accessible from both. Then they made it more complex. Both humans faced the horse, but one had their eyes open and one wore a blindfold. Again, the horses showed a preference for approaching the human who could see them. But the most interesting result came from the final test. Both humans faced the horse with eyes open, but one was looking at the horse while the other was looking at their phone. The horses still showed a preference for the human who was looking at them rather than the phone. They understood attention and presence at a remarkably sophisticated level. Your horse knows when you're truly present versus when you're physically there but mentally elsewhere, and they care about that distinction. This is why that barn phenomenon happens, where a horse will completely relax with one person but remain vigilant with everyone else. It's not magic. It's not just personality compatibility. It's based on measurable differences in how present, authentic, and emotionally consistent different humans are in their interactions. We're 20 minutes into this exploration, and we've established something crucial. Horses are far more sophisticated social observers than most people realize. They're reading faces, remembering interactions, evaluating emotional authenticity, and selectively trusting humans who demonstrate genuine calm and presence. But we haven't answered the central question yet. How exactly do horses choose their favorite human? What specific factors determine preference? What can you do to become the person your horse wants to be around? That's what we're diving into next. Let's get specific about what horses are actually evaluating when they decide who they trust most. The research points to 6 primary factors, and I want to walk through each one with you because understanding these factors changes how you approach every interaction with horses. Factor 1. Predictability. In 2017, researchers at Nottingham Trent University conducted what they called the consistency study. They had different handlers interact with horses using 3 different behavioral patterns: consistent and positive, consistent and neutral, or inconsistent, where the handler's mood and behavior changed randomly between sessions. After just 8 sessions, 8 interactions, the horses showed measurable preferences. Horses strongly preferred the consistent positive handler, which makes intuitive sense. But here's what surprised the researchers. Horses also preferred the consistent neutral handler over the inconsistent one, even when the inconsistent handler was sometimes warmer and more affectionate than the neutral handler. Predictability mattered more than occasional warmth. Safety mattered more than sporadic affection. Think about this from an evolutionary perspective. Horses are prey animals. For 50 million years, their survival has depended on being able to predict and avoid danger. An environment where threats are consistent and predictable is actually safer than an environment where good and bad happen randomly, because at least you can strategize around consistency. When you're inconsistent with a horse, cheerful one day, impatient the next, relaxed one week, stressed the next, you're creating the behavioral equivalent of an unpredictable environment. The horse can't develop a reliable prediction about what interaction with you will be like, so they stay guarded. Your favorite horse person in the barn might not be the most skilled or the most affectionate, but I'd bet they're the most consistent. Same energy, same approach, same emotional baseline, session after session. Dr. Carrie Ejichi, who led the Nottingham study, put it this way: horses are essentially asking, can I predict what will happen when I'm with you? If the answer is yes, they relax. If the answer is no, they remain vigilant. Factor 2. Emotional contagion and co-regulation. This one is absolutely fascinating. Horses don't just observe human emotions, they catch them. A 2015 study from Sweden measured heart rate variability in horses and handlers working together. Heart rate variability, or HRV, is a sophisticated measure of nervous system flexibility. High HRV indicates a calm, adaptive nervous system. Low HRV indicates stress. The researchers found something remarkable. When handlers had high HRV when they were genuinely relaxed, the horse's HRV increased within minutes of interaction. The horse's nervous system synchronized with the calm humans. But when handlers had low HRV, even if they appeared calm externally, the horse's HRV also decreased. The horses caught the stress. This is emotional contagion. It's bidirectional, automatic, and happens below the level of conscious control for both species. But it gets more interesting. The study tracked these pairs over 12 weeks. By the end of the study period, horses showed strong behavioral preferences for handlers whose baseline HRV was consistently high. They approached these handlers more readily, stayed closer during free interaction time, and showed more relaxed body language. The horses were choosing nervous system safety. They were preferring humans whose presence helped them regulate toward calm. This explains something I've seen repeatedly in barns. Highly skilled trainers who are anxious people often struggle to develop deep bonds with horses, while less technically skilled people who are naturally calm often become everyone's favorite handler. It's not about competence. It's about who helps the horse feel safe at the nervous system level. Now, here's what makes this actionable. You can't fake nervous system calm. Horses will detect the performance, but you can develop genuine calm through practice. Breathing techniques, mindfulness, addressing your own trauma and stress, these aren't just nice for you. They're literally changing what you offer horses as a partner. Factor 3. Autonomy and choice. This factor challenges a lot of traditional horse training assumptions, but the research is unambiguous. In 2019, French researchers compared two training approaches for young horses learning to load into trailers. Group 1 used traditional methods, gradual pressure and release, with handlers determining the pace and expectations. Group 2 used what they called choice-based training, where horses could opt out at any point and handlers followed the horse's pace completely. Both groups successfully learned to load. Training time was actually similar, but the behavioral differences after training were striking. Horses in the choice-based group approached their handlers significantly more often during free time. They showed more relaxed body language during subsequent training sessions. When given the choice between approaching their handler or exploring the environment, choice-trained horses chose their handler 68% of the time. The traditionally trained horses chose their handler only 32% of the time. They'd learned the skill, but they hadn't developed preference for the human teaching it. Respecting autonomy builds relationship. Overriding choice builds compliance. Dr. Carol Sankey, who led this research, argues that every time we give a horse genuine choice and they choose to participate, we're building trust equity. Every time we override their choice, even with kind methods, we're making a small withdrawal from that trust account. Your horse's favorite human is probably someone who asks rather than tells, who waits for yes rather than pushing through no. I want to share a story from a natural horsemanship trainer I interviewed. She described working with a rescue horse who'd been abused. This mare would comply with almost anything if pressed, but she was emotionally shut down. Dead eyes, as the trainer described it. The trainer made a radical decision. She would never ask the mare to do anything the mare didn't volunteer first. She spent 3 months just being present, grooming only where the mare indicated she wanted to be touched, walking only when the mare chose to walk with her. Other trainers at the facility thought she was wasting time. The mare needed training and socialization, they argued. She needed structure and expectations. But by month 4, something shifted. The mare started seeking out this trainer, started volunteering participation, started showing curiosity and engagement that she'd never displayed before. Within 6 months, this supposedly damaged horse was doing liberty work, following the trainer without halter or rope, performing complex movements purely because she chose to. That mare made a choice about her favorite human, and she chose the person who respected her autonomy absolutely. Factor 4. Touch quality and somatic awareness. Horses are incredibly sensitive to touch. They can feel a fly land on their skin. They can detect muscle tension in a rider's body. They're processing tactile information at a resolution most humans can barely imagine. A 2018 German study analyzed exactly how different handlers touched horses during grooming. They used pressure sensors and motion capture to quantify touch patterns. Then, they correlated those patterns with behavioral indicators of horse preference. The findings were specific and surprising. Horses preferred handlers whose touch had three qualities: appropriate pressure variation, rhythmic consistency, and what researchers called attentive responsiveness, the ability to adjust based on the horse's feedback. But here's what they didn't find. Horses didn't prefer light touch over firm touch or slow grooming over fast grooming. The absolute characteristics didn't matter. The responsiveness did. One handler in the study used very firm pressure during grooming, much firmer than most other handlers. But this handler was exquisitely attentive to how the horse responded. When the horse leaned into pressure, the handler maintained it. When the horse tensed or moved away, the handler immediately adjusted. Horses consistently rated this firm but responsive handler as preferred over handlers who used gentler but less attentive touch. Your horse doesn't necessarily want to be touched softly. They want to be touched attentively. They want you to be in dialogue with their body, rather than imposing your idea of what should feel good. This connects to something called somatic awareness, your ability to sense what's happening in your own body, and, by extension, to read what's happening in the horse's body through touch. A 2020 pilot study from California looked at handlers with different levels of somatic training. Some had training in Feldenkrais, Alexander technique, or other body awareness practices. Others had no such training. When these handlers worked with unfamiliar horses, the somatically trained handlers achieved relaxed engagement significantly faster. The horses yawned more, a sign of nervous system release in horses. They lowered their heads. They showed more exploratory behavior. The handlers weren't doing anything exotic. They were just more aware of subtle tension in their own bodies, and more able to read subtle feedback from the horse's body. Your body awareness directly impacts how horses experience touch from you. When you're disconnected from your own physical sensations, your touch becomes generic. When you're somatically present, your touch becomes a conversation. Factor 5. Play behavior and joyful interaction. This factor gets overlooked in a lot of equine science because it's harder to measure and quantify, but it's absolutely crucial to horse preference. Horses are playful animals, especially young horses, and horses in healthy social environments. They play with each other, mock fighting, chasing games, mutual grooming that becomes almost ticklish. A 2016 observational study from New Zealand tracked free-ranging horses and documented something fascinating. Horses had play partners. Not every horse played with every other horse. They had preferences. And those preferences were based partly on reciprocity. Horses who initiated play were more likely to become preferred companions if they also responded to play invitations from others. Now translate this to horse-human relationships. Researchers in Sweden tested whether horses would show preference for humans who engaged in playful interaction versus humans who only worked seriously with them. They had 2 handlers work with each horse. One handler did standard training and care. The other handler incorporated play-chasing games, trick training with a humorous tone, exaggerated responses to the horse's behavior. After 6 weeks, horses showed significant preference for the playful handler. They approached more readily, stayed engaged longer, and showed what researchers called social seeking behavior, actively trying to initiate interaction rather than just responding. But here's the nuance. The play had to be genuine and responsive. One handler in the study tried to be playful, but was actually anxious and performative about it. Horses showed no preference for this handler compared to the serious handlers. Authentic joy and playfulness create connection. Performed playfulness creates confusion. Your horse's favorite human might be someone who genuinely delights in the horse's personality, who laughs at their quirks, who turns routine care into opportunities for connection and fun. Factor 6. Vocal consistency and tone. The last factor is voice, and the research here is remarkably specific. Horses are incredibly attuned to human vocal tone. A 2014 study from Switzerland played recorded human voices to horses, some voices praising in high, enthusiastic tones, some voices scolding in low, harsh tones, some voices speaking neutrally. The horses' heart rates increased with harsh tones and decreased with praise tones, which isn't surprising. But what was surprising? This effect was strongest when horses heard voices from handlers they knew versus unfamiliar voices, saying the same words in the same tones. Familiar voices had more impact on horse physiology than unfamiliar voices. Your specific voice matters to your horse. A follow-up study in 2017 looked at handlers who used consistent verbal cues versus handlers whose verbal cues varied. Some handlers always said, "walk on," to ask for forward movement. Other handlers sometimes said, "walk on," sometimes said, "let's go," sometimes clicked or kissed. After just 4 training sessions, horses worked more calmly and responsively with consistent cue handlers. And in preference tests, horses approached consistent voice handlers more readily than variable voice handlers. Your horse is learning your personal vocal language. When you're consistent with it, you're making communication easier. When you're inconsistent, you're adding cognitive load to every interaction. But it's not just about the words. It's about tone, stability. Researchers found that handlers whose vocal tone remained consistent regardless of the horse's behavior, handlers who didn't get sharp or frustrated when things went wrong, developed stronger preferences from horses. Your horse is listening to whether your voice signals safety or unpredictability. They're choosing humans whose voices promise consistency. Let me synthesize these 6 factors for you: predictability, emotional co-regulation, respect for autonomy, attentive touch, authentic playfulness, and vocal consistency. Notice what's not on this list: technical skill, experience level, strength, status in the barn hierarchy, how much time you spend, or how many treats you bring. Horses are choosing emotional qualities over practical advantages. They're choosing safety, authenticity, and genuine connection over expertise. This changes the question from, "how do I train my horse to prefer me?" to, "how do I become someone my horse wants to be close to?" The second question requires internal work, not just external technique. It requires you to develop qualities in yourself, not just apply methods to the horse. And here's the beautiful part. This work benefits you as much as it benefits the horse. Developing nervous system regulation, somatic awareness, authentic presence. These capacities enhance every relationship you have, not just with horses. Your horse is offering you an invitation to your own development. They're showing you exactly where you're consistent or inconsistent, present or distracted, authentic or performing. In the next section, we're going to look at what happens when horses don't choose you as their favorite, why some horses remain distant despite your best efforts, and what the science tells us about individual differences in horse personality and how that affects bonding potential. Not every horse will choose you, no matter how perfectly you embody those 6 factors we just discussed. And that's not a failure on your part or the horse's part. It's biology. Just like humans, horses have distinct personalities, attachment styles, and social preferences that are partly innate and partly shaped by early experience. Understanding this removes so much unnecessary frustration from horse-human relationships. Let me start with a study that fundamentally changed how researchers think about equine personality. In 2013, a team from the University of Guelph in Canada assessed personality traits in over 200 horses using a comprehensive behavioral battery. They weren't just looking at breed or training history. They were measuring consistent individual differences in how horses responded to novelty, social situations, and challenges. They identified 5 distinct personality dimensions in horses: sociability, excitability, dominance, anxiousness, and inquisitiveness. Every horse scored somewhere on each dimension, creating a unique personality profile. Here's what matters for our discussion. Sociability scores predicted bonding behavior with humans. High sociability horses readily formed preferences for specific humans and showed strong attachment behaviors. Low sociability horses were more independent, less interested in prolonged human contact, and slower to develop preferences, even with ideal handling. Neither personality type is better or worse. They're just different strategies for navigating the world. A follow-up study in 2018 tracked high sociability and low sociability horses across multiple handlers. High sociability horses developed clear preferences quickly within a dozen interactions. Low sociability horses took much longer to show preference, and even their preference was more subtle. If you're working with a low sociability horse, they may never seek you out the way a high sociability horse would. They may never nicker when you arrive or follow you around the arena. But they might show preference in quieter ways, standing calmly while you work, choosing to graze near you rather than at a distance, or showing less stress with you than with other handlers. You have to calibrate your expectations to the individual horse's personality. Otherwise, you'll interpret their natural temperament as rejection, which damages your own emotional state and ironically makes it harder for the horse to bond with you. Let's talk about attachment styles, because this is where equine psychology gets really sophisticated. In 2019, Italian researchers applied attachment theory, originally developed to understand infant-parent bonds, to horse-human relationships. They tested whether horses showed attachment patterns similar to those documented in human children and other social animals. They used what's called the strange situation test. A horse and their regular handler entered an unfamiliar arena. The handler stayed for a few minutes, then left. An unfamiliar person entered. Then the handler returned. Researchers measured the horse's behavior during each phase. The findings were striking. Horses showed 4 distinct attachment patterns. Secure attachment. The horse explored confidently, while the handler was present, showed moderate distress when the handler left, and greeted the handler enthusiastically on return, while quickly resuming exploration. Anxious attachment. The horse stayed very close to the handler, showed extreme distress when the handler left, but was ambivalent on return, wanting contact but also showing conflict behaviors like pinned ears or tension. Avoidant attachment. The horse didn't show strong preference for the handler over the stranger, showed little distress when the handler left, and didn't show particular interest in the handler's return. Disorganized attachment. The horse showed contradictory behaviors, approaching and fleeing, seeking contact, then rejecting it, with no coherent strategy for dealing with the handler's presence or absence. About 40% of horses showed secure attachment, 30% showed anxious attachment, 20% showed avoidant attachment, 10% showed disorganized attachment. Here's what's crucial. Attachment style was partly predicted by the horse's early life experience. Horses who'd been weaned gradually and had consistent early handling were more likely to show secure attachment. Horses who'd been abruptly weaned or had chaotic early handling showed higher rates of insecure attachment. But, and this is important, attachment style could shift with consistent, attuned handling. Horses with initially insecure attachment patterns, who worked with handlers trained in attachment-aware approaches, showed movement toward more secure patterns over 6 to 12 months. You can't change a horse's fundamental personality, but you can influence their attachment security through how you show up in the relationship. If you're working with an anxiously attached horse, they might seem very bonded to you, following you constantly, showing distress when you leave. But this isn't actually secure preference. It's anxiety-based clinging. These horses need you to be calm during separations, to return reliably, and to encourage their independence rather than reinforcing their anxiety. If you're working with an avoidantly attached horse, they might seem indifferent. They're not choosing you as favorite, but they're also not rejecting you. They're protecting themselves from potential disappointment or abandonment. These horses need extremely consistent presence without pressure for closeness. You earn trust through reliability over time, not through pursuing connection. If you're working with a disorganized horse, often horses with trauma histories, you need to be prepared for a long, patient process. These horses want connection, but don't trust it. They approach, then flee. They seek comfort, then reject it. They need handlers who can stay emotionally regulated through the confusion and not take the rejection personally. Let me share a case study that illustrates this beautifully. A therapeutic riding center in Oregon worked with a thoroughbred mare named Daisy who'd been rescued from a neglect situation. Daisy showed classic disorganized attachment. She'd approach handlers hopefully, then suddenly spook and bolt. She'd stand for grooming, then without warning kick out. She seemed to want connection desperately, but couldn't tolerate it. Most handlers found her too difficult, too unpredictable. But one handler, a woman named Sarah, who'd done extensive trauma work in her own therapy, recognized the pattern. Sarah had been abused as a child and had worked through her own disorganized attachment in her human relationships. Sarah worked with Daisy for 18 months using what she called radical consistency with zero expectations. She showed up at the same time every day. She always greeted Daisy the same way. She offered interaction but never pursued if Daisy retreated. She stayed calm through Daisy's conflicted behaviors. She celebrated tiny moments of connection without demanding more. Gradually, very gradually, Daisy's behavior organized. The contradictory approach-flee patterns decreased. She started showing signs of secure attachment, exploring while Sarah was present, showing brief distress when Sarah left, greeting Sarah reliably on return. By 2 years, Daisy was one of the program's star horses, calm, engaged, clearly bonded to Sarah. She still wasn't a horse who bonded readily with everyone, but she had developed secure attachment with one human. That changed everything for her. Sarah told researchers, "I couldn't have done this before I'd done my own work. I would have taken her rejection personally. I would have gotten frustrated. I would have needed her to trust me on my timeline. But because I understood disorganized attachment from the inside, I could be what she needed." This brings me to something I think is essential to understand. Your horse choosing you as their favorite isn't about you being the best handler or the most skilled horse person. It's about fit. It's about whether your nervous system and their nervous system can co-regulate effectively, whether your personality and their personality are compatible, whether your attachment patterns allow for healthy connection. Some of the most skilled riders I know are not their horses' favorites, and some people with minimal technical skill have horses who adore them, because skill and connection are different things. A 2020 study from Denmark looked at this directly. They assessed handlers on technical competence using a standardized riding and handling test. Then they measured which handlers' horses showed behavioral preference for. The correlation between technical competence and horse preference was weak, almost negligible. But when they measured handlers on emotional intelligence, self-regulation capacity, and interpersonal sensitivity, the correlation with horse preference was strong. Horses are choosing emotional qualities over technical abilities. Now let's talk about something that complicates this picture: past trauma in horses. Horses who've experienced abuse, neglect, or severe stress can have fundamentally altered trust systems. A 2017 Australian study looked at horses with documented trauma histories and compared their bonding patterns to horses with no known trauma. The trauma history horses took significantly longer to show trust behaviors with any human. They showed more generalized wariness. And interestingly, when they did develop preferences, those preferences were often more intense and more fragile than in non-traumatized horses. It's as if trauma creates a higher barrier to trust. But once that barrier is crossed, the horse invests heavily in that trusted person. They become more dependent because they've learned the world is dangerous and safe people are rare. If you're working with a trauma history horse, becoming their favorite human is both more difficult and more consequential. You have to be exceptionally consistent. You have to tolerate their wariness without taking it personally. You have to understand that their trust, once given, is a profound gift that comes with responsibility. These horses won't forgive inconsistency the way other horses might. They can't afford to. Their survival strategy requires them to be more selective and more vigilant. A handler at a rescue facility told me about a gelding who'd been starved and beaten. This horse took 3 years to show clear preference for any human. 3 years of daily, consistent care before he started approaching, hopefully, rather than defensively. But when he finally chose his person, a quiet man who did barn chores and never asked anything of the horses, that bond was unshakable. The horse would stand for hours near where this man worked. He'd call to him specifically. He showed separation, distress, when the man was on vacation. That man became the center of that horse's sense of safety in the world. That's what favorite human means for a traumatized horse. Let's talk about age factors, because this affects bonding potential significantly. Young horses, yearlings, and 2-year-olds are generally more plastic in their bonding. They form preferences quickly and can shift those preferences if handling changes. They're in a sensitive period for social learning. A 2015 French study worked with yearlings and found that positive handling during this period created horses who were generally more trusting of humans throughout their lives. Negative handling during this period created horses who were generally more wary, even with different handlers years later. If you're working with a young horse, you're shaping their fundamental model of what humans are and whether humans are trustworthy. That's a huge responsibility and an enormous opportunity. Middle-aged horses, 5 to 15 years old, are more established in their preferences but can still develop new bonds. They're past the sensitive period but still socially flexible. Older horses, late teens and beyond, can bond deeply, but they're typically more set in their ways. If they've had a favorite human for years, they may not invest as heavily in new relationships, though they can certainly develop trust and preference with new handlers. A 2018 study from the UK tracked horses who'd been rehomed in their late teens. These horses did develop working relationships with new handlers, and behavioral measures showed they could develop preferences. But the intensity of attachment was generally lower than what researchers observed in younger horses forming new bonds. It's like the difference between making a best friend in childhood versus making a new friend in your 60s. Both are valuable, but the quality of investment differs. I want to address something that causes a lot of unnecessary heartbreak. What happens when your horse clearly prefers someone else? Maybe you own the horse, you care for them daily, you love them deeply, but they light up for someone else, maybe the barn manager, or a particular rider, or even a visitor. It's painful. It can feel like rejection. But here's what the science suggests. Horses can have different kinds of relationships with different humans. And those relationships can all be valuable even if they're not all favorite. A 2019 observational study tracked horses who interacted with 3 categories of humans: primary caretakers, who fed and cleaned; trainers, who did most of the riding work; and what they called leisure handlers, who just spent time with horses without demanding anything. Horses showed different behavioral patterns with each category. With caretakers, they showed routine comfort but not necessarily enthusiasm. With trainers, they showed engagement and focus but often also tension around performance expectations. With leisure handlers, they showed the most relaxed social behavior and the most seeking of voluntary contact. The horse's favorite was usually the leisure handler, even though the caretaker and trainer spent more time and had more skill. This tells us something important. Horses may prefer humans who offer relationship without pressure, who offer presence without demands, who can just be with them rather than always doing something to them or asking something from them. If your horse prefers someone else, ask yourself what that person offers that you don't. Often, it's relaxation and absence of agenda. That's information you can use to shift how you show up. One owner I spoke with was devastated that her horse clearly preferred the barn's young working student over her, the owner. She spent thousands on this horse, provided excellent care, rode regularly. But the horse's eyes tracked the working student, and he'd whinny when she arrived. When I asked what the working student did with the horse, the owner said, "Nothing really. She just hangs out in his stall sometimes, reads books sitting on his hay bale, braids his mane while chatting to him about her day." That working student was offering pure relationship, no agenda, no expectations, just companionship. The owner realized she always came to the barn with a plan: riding, training, veterinary care, some kind of task. She never just was with her horse. She started spending 15 minutes before every ride, just standing with her horse, not grooming with purpose, not preparing for work, just being present. Within 2 months, her horse's behavior toward her had shifted noticeably. He wasn't choosing her over the working student, but he was choosing her more than he had been. You don't have to be the favorite to have a meaningful relationship, but you do have to offer something beyond utility if you want genuine connection. Let me end this section with something that gives me hope about all of this. Horses are remarkably forgiving and remarkably resilient in relationships. Even horses with difficult histories can form new, secure attachments. Even handlers who've made mistakes can repair and rebuild trust. The science shows that what matters most is consistency going forward, not perfection in the past. A 2021 Swiss study looked at handlers who'd had major ruptures in their relationships with horses. Moments of severe frustration, unfair punishment, or loss of emotional control. These handlers went through a repair process, acknowledging the rupture with themselves, shifting their own regulation, and returning to consistent, positive interaction. The horses overwhelmingly accepted the repair. Within weeks of shifted handling, behavioral measures of trust returned to baseline or higher. Horses don't hold grudges the way humans do. They respond to patterns, not individual incidents. If you've made mistakes with your horse, you can repair them. If your horse doesn't prefer you now, you can become someone they choose. It requires genuine change in you, not just technique change, but it's possible. In our final section, we're going to look at practical application. How do you actually use all of this science to deepen your bond with your horse? What does it look like day to day to become the person your horse wants to be close to? Let's make this concrete. You've heard all the science. You understand the 6 key factors. You know about personality differences and attachment styles. But what do you actually do when you walk into the barn tomorrow? I'm going to give you a framework based on the research we've covered, organized around what I call the 3 pillars of earned preference: presence, consistency, and responsiveness. Let's start with presence, because this is the foundation everything else builds on. Presence isn't just showing up physically. It's showing up with your attention, your awareness, and your nervous system. Remember that Swedish study about heart rate variability and emotional contagion? Your horse is reading your internal state within seconds of interaction. Here's a practical protocol based on research from the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna. They tested what they called grounding practices with handlers before horse interactions. Handlers who spent just 3 minutes doing a simple grounding exercise before working with horses, slow breathing, body scan, settling into the present moment showed significantly higher heart rate variability during subsequent interactions, and their horses showed calmer behavior and more social seeking. 3 minutes. That's not a huge time investment, but it changed the quality of the entire interaction. So here's your first practical step. Develop a pre-barn ritual. Before you enter your horse's space, take 3 minutes to arrive in your own body. Stand outside the barn. Take 10 slow breaths. Notice the sensations in your feet on the ground. Release tension in your shoulders and jaw. Bring your attention fully to where you are right now, not where you just came from or where you're going after. This isn't woo-woo. This is nervous system science. You're shifting from sympathetic activation, the stress response, to parasympathetic activation, the rest and digest state. And your horse will feel that shift immediately. A trainer in Colorado implemented this with her whole barn staff. She required everyone to take 2 minutes at the barn entrance to breathe and center before working with horses. Within a month, the barn manager reported fewer incidents of horses spooking or showing resistance during handling. The horses were calmer because the humans were calmer. The second aspect of presence is attention quality. Remember that study about horses preferring humans who were looking at them versus looking at phones? When you're with your horse, be with your horse, not partly with your horse while thinking about your workday or scrolling your phone or planning your next task. A 2019 Japanese study measured what they called attention fragments, moments when a handler's attention left the horse during interaction. They used eye tracking and neural feedback to detect when handlers were mentally elsewhere. Horses responded to attention fragments with increased vigilance behavior, head raising, ear swiveling, tension in the jaw. Even when the handler's hands were still working with the horse, if the handler's attention had left, the horse noticed and responded with stress signals. Conversely, when handlers maintained what researchers called continuous soft focus, broad awareness that included the horse but wasn't staring intensely, horses showed the deepest relaxation. Here's how to practice this. When you're grooming, don't think about grooming. Don't mentally rehearse your ride or plan your evening. Just feel the brush in your hand. Notice the horse's coat texture. Watch their breathing. Sense their subtle weight shifts. Stay in sensory awareness rather than thinking awareness. At first, you'll notice your attention fragments constantly. That's normal. Just bring it back, again and again, without judgment. This is meditation practice applied to horse time. One owner described practicing this for 2 weeks. I realized I'd been treating grooming time as task time. My body was there, but my mind was already in the saddle or back at my office. When I started actually being present during grooming, my mare's whole demeanor changed. She started leaning into the brush, dropping her head, sighing. She'd never done that before. But I'd never really been there before. The third aspect of presence is somatic awareness, your ability to sense what's happening in your own body, moment to moment. Remember that California study about handlers with body awareness training developing faster rapport with horses? You don't need years of Feldenkrais training, but you do need to start noticing your own physical patterns. Here's a simple practice. During any interaction with your horse, periodically check in with 3 body areas: jaw, shoulders, and belly. These are the primary places humans hold tension. Is your jaw clenched? Can you soften it? Are your shoulders hunched up toward your ears? Can you drop them? Is your belly tight? Can you breathe into it? When you release tension in your own body, horses often release tension in theirs. It's that emotional contagion effect happening in real time. A dressage rider I interviewed struggled with a tense, spooky mare. When she started doing body check-ins during rides, noticing and releasing her own tension, the mare's tension decreased dramatically. Not because the rider was doing anything different technically, but because the rider's body was offering a different message. Now let's talk about consistency, the second pillar. Consistency doesn't mean rigidity. It means your core energy signature stays recognizable across contexts. The Nottingham study showed horses prefer predictable patterns, even neutral ones, over inconsistent warmth. Here's how to build consistency. Identify your baseline emotional state when you're at your best with horses. Not pumped up, not performing enthusiasm, but genuinely calm and engaged. That's your home base. Your job is to return to that home base as consistently as possible. When things go wrong, your horse spooks, refuses a request, steps on your foot, your nervous system will want to spike into stress. That's normal. But horses are watching whether you can return to baseline or whether you stay dysregulated. A 2020 German study tracked handlers' recovery time after stressful incidents. Some handlers returned to calm baseline within 60 seconds. Others stayed elevated for 5 minutes or longer. Horses showed much stronger preferences for fast recovery handlers. Here's a practical technique from that study. When something goes wrong, take 3 deep breaths before you respond. Those 3 breaths give your nervous system time to downregulate. They create a pause between stimulus and response. They help you return to your baseline instead of reacting from stress. One eventing trainer described implementing this after reading that study. I used to react immediately when my horse did something I didn't like. Now, I pause. I breathe. I notice my stress response and let it pass. Then I respond from calm. It's completely changed our relationship. He trusts me now because I'm trustworthy. I don't lose it anymore. The second aspect of consistency is routine and ritual. Horses are creatures of pattern. They feel safe in predictability. This doesn't mean you have to do everything exactly the same way every single time, but it means having recognizable patterns that mark different kinds of interactions. A therapeutic riding program in Montana implemented what they called hello and goodbye rituals based on research about routine importance. Every handler greeted horses the same way, same spot in the stall, same tone of voice, same gentle touch on the shoulder. And every handler said goodbye the same way, running a hand down the horse's neck, a specific verbal phrase, stepping back and making brief eye contact before leaving. After 6 weeks, horses showed significantly more social-seeking behavior toward handlers. They approached more readily at greeting and stayed engaged longer during goodbye. The rituals created predictability, and predictability created safety. What could your rituals be? Maybe you always spend 2 minutes just standing with your horse before doing anything else. Maybe you always groom in a particular sequence. Maybe you have a specific sound you make when approaching from behind. Maybe you always offer a last scratch in a favorite spot before leaving. The specific ritual doesn't matter as much as the consistency of it. The third aspect of consistency is emotional honesty. This might seem to contradict the idea of maintaining baseline calm, but it doesn't. A 2018 study from Finland looked at handlers who suppressed negative emotions versus handlers who felt negative emotions but processed them appropriately. Horses showed more stress around emotion-suppressing handlers than around emotion-processing handlers. When you're suppressing, pretending to be calm, when you're actually frustrated, your body tells the truth even when your face doesn't. Micro-expressions, muscle tension, breathing patterns. Horses read all of it. But when you're processing, acknowledging the frustration, breathing through it, returning to baseline, your body and your presentation align, that's what horses trust. So consistency doesn't mean pretending to feel fine when you don't. It means being honest with yourself about what you feel and having tools to process emotion rather than suppressing or exploding. One owner described her breakthrough with this: "I thought I was protecting my horse by hiding my bad days, showing up with a smile, even when I was grieving or stressed, but he always knew. He was tense with me on those days. When I started being honest, coming to the barn and saying out loud, 'I'm having a hard day today, buddy,' and then breathing and settling before asking anything of him, he relaxed. It was like he could finally trust me, because I was real." Now, let's talk about the third pillar: responsiveness. Responsiveness is your ability to read and adjust to your horse's feedback in real time. Remember those studies about touch quality and autonomy? Horses prefer attentive interaction over prescription interaction. Here's how to develop responsiveness. Think of every interaction as a conversation rather than a task. In a conversation, you say something, then you listen to the response. Then you adjust what you say next based on what you heard. Horse interaction works the same way. You make a request with your body or voice or touch. The horse responds. Maybe they comply easily, maybe they resist, maybe they comply but with tension. You read that response. Then you adjust your next action based on what the horse just told you. A natural horsemanship trainer describes this as feel, read, and adjust. You feel what you're asking through your own body. You read the horse's response through their body. You adjust based on what you read. The problem is, most handlers get stuck in task mode. I need to pick out this hoof. Or, we need to load in the trailer. The task becomes the focus, and the horse's feedback becomes an obstacle to the task, rather than information to learn from. A 2017 Canadian study compared task-focused handlers with conversation-focused handlers. Both groups successfully completed training objectives. But conversation-focused handlers developed significantly stronger preferences from horses. Task-focused handlers asked, "How do I get this done?" Conversation-focused handlers asked, "What is my horse telling me right now? And how do I work with that?" Here's a practical example. You ask your horse to pick up their hoof for cleaning. They shift their weight but don't lift the hoof. Task-focused response: insist harder. Pull the leg up. Get it done. Conversation-focused response: pause. Why didn't they lift? Are they unbalanced? Uncomfortable? Unsure what you're asking? Give them a moment to organize themselves. Ask again with a clearer cue. Be ready to help them balance if needed. The second approach takes longer in that moment, but it builds a horse who offers their feet willingly because lifting feet becomes a cooperative action rather than a compliance battle. The second aspect of responsiveness is recognizing and honoring threshold. Every horse has a threshold, the point where they shift from learning and engaging to self-protecting and shutting down. That threshold is different for every horse and changes based on context. Your job is to read when you're approaching threshold and back off before crossing it. This requires incredible attentiveness because threshold signals can be subtle. A change in breathing, a tightening around the eyes, ears that go from mobile to fixed, weight shifting toward escape. A 2019 study from Australia trained handlers to recognize threshold signals. They taught handlers to watch for what they called pre-stress indicators, The subtle changes that happen before a horse shows obvious distress. Handlers who learned to read pre-stress indicators and respond by reducing pressure developed horses who were more confident, more willing to try new things, and showed stronger handler preference. Because the horses learned their humans would keep them safe, not push them past their edge. One trainer described learning this: "I used to think I was being a good trainer by pushing through resistance. If my horse was worried, I'd make them do it anyway to prove it was safe. But I was teaching them that their signals didn't matter. When I started honoring threshold, backing off when I saw early stress signals, everything shifted. My horses became braver because they knew I'd listen." The third aspect of responsiveness is repair. You will mess up. You will miss signals. You will push too hard, or misread, or lose your cool. What matters is how you repair. Remember that Swiss study about rupture and repair? Horses are remarkably forgiving if you acknowledge the rupture and return to good handling. Here's how to repair. When you realize you've pushed too hard or reacted poorly, stop. Take a breath. Soften. Then offer your horse a moment of ease. Maybe just standing together quietly. Maybe a reassuring touch on a spot they like. Maybe stepping back and lowering your energy. You don't need to apologize verbally, though some handlers find it helpful for their own processing. You apologize through your body, through softening, pausing, returning to baseline. A polo player described a repair moment. "I got frustrated during a match and jerked my horse's mouth. Not hard, but harder than I ever do. I felt him tense underneath me. The moment the play paused, I dropped my reins, scratched his withers, and just breathed. Trying to say, 'I'm sorry, buddy. That was my stress, not you.' He blew out a huge breath and relaxed. I swear he forgave me in that moment." Repair doesn't undo harm, but it shows your horse that ruptures don't have to mean relationship endings. It builds trust that you'll return to good even when you temporarily lose it. Let me give you a synthesis practice that brings all three pillars together: presence, consistency, and responsiveness. Spend 10 minutes with your horse with no agenda. No grooming, no training, no task. Just being together in their space. Stand in their stall or paddock. Breathe. Notice your body. Notice their body. When they shift, notice it. When they look at you, acknowledge it with a soft gaze. When they approach, stay still and let them investigate you. When they move away, don't follow. This practice develops all three pillars simultaneously. You're practicing presence by being fully there. You're practicing consistency by showing up with calm baseline energy. You're practicing responsiveness by noticing and honoring the horse's choices moment by moment. A research team in Sweden studied this exact practice. They had handlers do 10 minutes of agenda-free presence time 3 times per week for 8 weeks. They compared these horses to control group horses who got the same amount of total handler time but all task-focused. The agenda-free horses showed significantly stronger preference behaviors, more approaching, more social-seeking, more relaxed body language, and more voluntary engagement during subsequent training sessions. The handlers reported it felt strange at first, uncomfortable, like they were wasting time. But by week 4, most handlers said it became their favorite part of working with horses. Because that's when they saw their horses as individuals, not projects, and the horses responded to being seen. One owner in that study wrote, "I've owned this horse for 6 years. I thought I knew her, but I didn't really know her until I spent those 10 minutes just being with her, with no plan. I saw her personality in a completely new way, and now when I do work with her, she's so much more engaged. It's like she finally trusts that I see her as more than a tool or a project. I see her as her." Let me close with some specific troubleshooting scenarios, because I know many of you are thinking about particular challenges with your horses. Scenario 1. Your horse seems anxious and clingy with you. They follow you everywhere, show distress when you leave, but don't actually seem happy. They seem stressed about connection rather than comforted by it. This is likely anxious attachment. Your horse needs you to be calm and consistent about separations. Practice short departures and reliable returns. Don't reinforce the anxiety with excessive comfort when they're distressed. That actually increases anxiety. Instead, stay neutral and matter-of-fact during departures and reunions. Encourage their independence by rewarding calm behavior when you're at a distance, not just close contact. Scenario 2. Your horse is indifferent to you. They're compliant but show no signs of preference or seeking. They don't greet you, don't follow you, don't seem to care if you're there or not. This could be avoidant attachment or low sociability personality. Either way, don't push for connection. That creates pressure and more distance. Instead, be consistently present without expectation. Show up reliably. Be calm and safe. But don't demand relationship. Let them choose to approach rather than pursuing them. This can take months, but avoidant horses who learn you won't pressure them often gradually choose to connect. Scenario 3. Your horse is fine with you during work, but actively avoids you during free time. They walk away when you approach in the pasture, but they work obediently under saddle. This suggests you've built a working relationship, but not a social relationship. The horse sees you as boss or task giver, but not as friend. You need to separate your identities. Spend time that's purely social, no work, no agenda. Bring the relationship-building presence to casual interactions. Let them learn you're not always asking for something. Scenario 4. Your horse was bonded to you, but has become distant. They used to greet you, seek you out, but now they don't. Something shifted, either in you or in their experience with you. Scan for what changed. Are you more stressed? Did you push them too hard in training? Did you have a rupture you didn't repair? Did someone else start working with them who offers something different? The path forward is return to basics. Consistent presence, honoring threshold, agenda-free time. Rebuild trust through reliability. Don't try to force reconnection. Earn it again. Scenario 5. Your horse loves everyone. They're friendly and social with all handlers. Don't show strong preference for anyone. This is actually a sign of secure attachment and high sociability. It's not a problem to fix. This horse has generalized trust in humans. They might not have a single favorite, but they have a whole category of favored humans. Celebrate that. It means they've been handled well throughout their life. Let me end where we began, with the question of how horses choose their favorite human. The answer, as we've seen through 70 minutes of scientific research, is both simple and complex. Horses choose humans who help them feel safe. Safe at the nervous system level. Safe because of consistency. Safe because of attentiveness. Safe because of respect for their autonomy and threshold. They choose humans whose presence is regulating rather than dysregulating. Humans who can be authentically calm rather than performing calm. Humans who respond to feedback rather than imposing agendas. They choose humans who see them as individuals with their own personalities, preferences, and needs. Not as tools or projects or extensions of human ego, but as beings worthy of genuine relationship. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop trying to make your horse choose you and instead focus on becoming someone worth choosing, you often become chosen. Because horses read intention. They read beneath your actions to your orientation. Are you here for connection or control? For genuine relationship or performance of relationship? For their well-being or your satisfaction? The science shows they know the difference, and they choose accordingly. Your horse is offering you an invitation. Become more present, more consistent, more responsive. Not just for their benefit, for yours. Because the qualities that earn horse preference, nervous system regulation, somatic awareness, authentic presence, emotional honesty, are the same qualities that deepen every meaningful relationship in your life. Your horse is a mirror. What they reflect about your capacity for genuine connection is information you can use far beyond the barn. So the question isn't really, how do I make my horse choose me? The question is, am I willing to become someone worth choosing? The science has given you the roadmap. The practice is yours to walk.